Hello, hope you had a good weekend. It's Monday again, and today I just wanted to talk a little bit about print media, and in particular the fact that print media is really suffering in a sort of current climate and current context. Last week we talked a bit about the differences and the impact that technologies has over different media content and more importantly the relationship with the audience. Of course, one of the impacts of that is that more and more of the audience are using technology to stay online, and less of them are using what we might call analog media, and most of the time this is the print media. Something that sort of drew my attention to this, or made me think that I would record one of these about print media versus online media, was a rather amusing, although quite sad, headline on a Washington publication, an American newspaper called the Washington Post Express, which is affiliated with its more famous sister publication, the Washington Post. The Express was a free paper that was given out in the Washington DC metropolitan area and had really decent readership and circulation figures a few years ago, but due to declining numbers of readers and debt as well, it ceased publication last week and ran with its final headline. I'll post a picture of this below, but it ran with its final headline of "Hope you enjoy your stinking phones." Okay, so really in your face. More aggressive than passive aggressive, I guess. But I suppose cutting to the quick, this is definitely the reason why newspapers like the Post Express are no longer doing business as a print publication. It's happened to newspapers in the UK. Not all of them, like the News of the World, have disappeared into sort of scandal, but reputable, good quality broadsheet newspapers, papers like The Independent, which had been running since the 80s, closed its doors a couple of years ago now and exists solely as an online publication. And other papers are having to do things to follow suit. The Times is behind a paywall, which seems to be relatively successful. The Guardian, whenever you're on it, will ask for donations after you've read a certain amount of articles online. But it's not actually newspapers I want to talk about today. Just through a sort of chance, I guess, an article that was published this weekend in The Guardian, or on The Guardian's website, is all about magazines closing down and how there has been a significant decline in magazine sales and publications in the UK over the past few years. The article's by a journalist called Mark Sweeney. The article's called Between the Covers: How the British Fell Out of Love with Magazines. It's quite prescient for us in year 13 because we will be beginning our study of component 2 next week, and we'll be starting with magazines, albeit with an older text, a 1965 edition of Vogue magazine, but we will then be going on to study the Independent magazine, The Big Issue. And we will always talk about the decline in sales and the kind of sort of collapse of the magazine industry whenever we talk about it. It is a key feature of studying industries when looking at magazines, because they used to be one of the go-to pieces of media for the general public. And of course, it's no leap of the imagination to see how smartphones have replaced magazines in so many ways. What's interesting about the article, though, is it talks about not only that inevitable decline and the magazines that are shutting down. In fact, this article was written in the wake of one of Britain's most loved women's magazines, Marie Claire, ceasing to print anymore. But it also talks about some of the things that other magazines are doing to combat these downturn in sales. The fact that magazines like Glamour are going twice yearly and have seen profits actually improve. Talking about how the launch of new magazines has often got a strategy that incorporates the online world. So, for example, the rather I suppose, overtly cool and fashionable magazine, The Face, which stopped publishing in about the year 2000, 2002, I think, has made a comeback after 15 or 16 years out of print, is back again as a quarterly magazine which is embracing new online technologies rather than being resistant against them. So the article is really interesting. Do give it a read. I'd be interested to know any magazines that you yourself read, or what your attitudes towards them are. Is it something that you consider to be purely for people who, of an older generation, a completely different demographic? Or if you do read them, what do you look for in a magazine? Is it something that you can just dip in and out of, or is it publications that are for a greater or a more niche audience, hobbyist, specialist audiences, as it were? If you aren't interested in them, or if you have picked them up and decided not to, what is it about them? Are they too old-fashioned in their representations, in their ideologies? An interesting part of the article that Sweeney tackles is the fact that that actually Marie Claire in particular seemed to be a fairly forward-thinking women's magazine. It seemed to, whilst it maybe incorporated some of the stereotypes we'd expect from a women's magazine, it also did its bit to include content that was maybe a bit more forward-thinking. In fact, on the sidebar of the article, there is a quotation about how women's magazines are the most progressive they've ever been, and yet they seem to be closing down. Now, whether or not that is true is another area that needs to be put under scrutiny, really. Any aspects of magazines, whether you read them or you don't, whether you think they're purely for an older generation, or they do have something to offer your own demographic, I'd like to know. And read the article, particularly if you're in year 13. It's going to come in very useful over the next few weeks. Anyway, speak to you again. Bye-bye.